March 13, 1881. Russian Tsar Alexander II is traveling through St. Petersburg before he is attacked by bomb-wielding assailants. The attackers, from a revolutionary group called the People's Will, mortally injure the Tsar Emancipator. Shortly after his death, rumors circulated that the Tsar's assassins were Jewish, however only one of them was Jewish. A wave of anti-Semitic violence broke out all around the Pale of Settlement, a special area within the Russian Empire beyond which Jews were not permitted to live. Russian Zionist writer Peretz Smolenskin wrote in 1881, "Fear is pervasive, the pogroms may start again, so even those who do have something left are afraid to begin over again in their businesses or crafts." Just how hard was life for a Jew in Russia? Jews were absorbed into the Russian Empire in the 1700s as the Tsars conquered territory in what we know today as Poland. Over the next century, the Jews of the Russian Empire would experience both benevolence and repression depending on who was in charge. Nicholas I came down hard on the Jews. In 1827, he decreed that every Jewish community would deliver a certain number of military recruits. Jewish boys were to serve at least 25 years in the army. Attempts were made to convert these Jewish recruits to Russian Orthodoxy. Zvi Giedelman writes, "A double catastrophe fell on the heads of Russian Jewry. Their sons would be taken away not only from their homes and families, but in all likelihood also from their religion." After the assassination of Alexander II in 1881 and the pogroms which followed, Jewish migration to Ottoman-occupied Palestine began to pick up steam. However, most Jews who left Russia during this time went to the United States. Around 2 million Jews from the Russian Empire arrived in the US over the 4 decades that followed. Following the outbreak of the Russian Civil War, Jews fell victim to anti-Semitic brutality at the hands of the pro-Tsarist white forces. The Communist Reds were, relatively speaking, more tolerant toward Jews. In the early years of communist rule, the Soviet authorities promoted the use and propagation of Yiddish as a means of creating a secular socialist Yiddish culture. However, the Soviet government's measures did not enjoy widespread support among the Jews. The younger generations preferred to adopt Russian culture, and the older generations of Jews held on to the traditional Jewish customs. In 1927, a mission was sent by the Soviet government to survey an area of land known as Birobidzhan. This territory was the size of Belgium and only 32,000 people inhabited the area in the 1930s. In 1928, the Soviet government assigned Birobidzhan to Jewish settlement. However, this area, also known as the Jewish Autonomous Oblast, did not attract many Jewish settlers. Birobidzhan proved inhospitable, and lack of proper farm machinery only worsened the settlers' plight. Jews never constituted the majority in Birobidzhan. Zvi Giedelman says, "The Great Purge of 1934 to 1939 was not directed specifically at Jews. Indeed, a high proportion of the purgers, many of whom were eventually purged themselves, were Jews, employees of the dreaded secret police. As members of a highly urbanized, educated nationality, Jews were overrepresented in the party, government, military, academia, and police, all of which were much more thoroughly purged than the general population." During the Second World War, 1.5 million Soviet Jews were killed, not including those killed in combat. It is estimated that 500,000 Jews served in the Soviet military during the war. Approximately 180,000 died in combat. Nearly 150 Jews were awarded the USSR's highest military decoration, the Hero of the Soviet Union. In fact, Jews were the 4th most decorated Soviet nationality. After the war, Soviet leader Joseph Stalin engaged in a quote-unquote anti-cosmopolitan campaign. Zvi Giedelman writes, "Jews were singled out as quote-unquote rootless cosmopolitans, meaning that they were unpatriotic and had no attachment to the Soviet motherland. Jews were arbitrarily arrested and executed, accused of crimes such as embezzlement, bribery, and economic sabotage." On January 13, 1953, news outlet Pravda announced that 9 Jewish doctors were arrested on charges of espionage and terrorism. These were obviously trumped-up charges based on very dubious evidence. Jews were also removed from government positions. Ironically, the USSR was the first country to recognize Israel de jure and even approved arms sales to Israel. However, Soviet policy toward Israel was more about weakening Britain's position in the Middle East than genuine support for Zionism. The Cold War had a profound effect on Soviet Jewry. During the Cold War, the USSR was arming and supporting the Arab states fighting against Israel, which had entered the Western camp. Between 1968 to 1989, around 240,000 Jews, or 11% of the total Soviet Jewish population in 1970, had emigrated from the Soviet Union. In the beginning, the vast majority went to Israel. More than a third of Jews from the Soviet Union who moved to Israel were from Georgia, the North Caucasus, and Central Asia. Jewish traditions in those areas were more widely observed. Zvi Giedelman says, "And though in the last part of the century this eroded, Georgian Jews adhered to religious practices more than any other Jewish group in the USSR, and many continue these practices in emigration." Another third were Zapadniki, Jews from the western extremes of the USSR. While many Jews were able to leave, a very significant number were not. Those who were denied permission to leave more than once by the government were called refuseniks. Zvi Giedelman wrote, "First, precisely in a period when they enjoy more political, economic, and cultural freedom than at any time in history, Jews of the FSU are leaving it in droves. Second, it seems that the more Jews that leave, the more that emerge and declare themselves Jews. The driving forces behind Jewish emigration from the former Soviet republics include poor economic prospects and popular anti-Semitism. The breakup of the Soviet Union fragmented the Jews living within it. No longer were Soviet Jews part of one country, they were now part of 15 countries. Although the Jewish population of the former USSR is in decline, Russian Jewish culture is vibrant in Israel. Russian-speaking Jews make up about 15% of the Israeli population. Russian is the third most widely spoken language in Israel today. Soviet Jews and their descendants maintain a major presence in the Israeli tech industry. Israel even has the third largest community of Russian speakers outside of the former USSR after the US and Germany. What do you guys think? What will the future of the Jews of the former USSR look like? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching.